we have our next speaker, who is Rabbi. We are, we talked about this being the telethon here, right? Going, I feel like I should be, Jerry Lewis, loosening my tie here, the sweat pouring off my head, looking to see who the next act is. But there we see him. Rabbi Eric Woodward is going to be our next speaker, and entrepreneurship is actually I think a good introduction in its own way for Rabbi Woodward, who I know is working on new ventures all the time, and very pleased to have you here with us to be able to teach and to help us further grow in our study of Torah.
Thank you so much, Mark. Yeah, I feel it's really lovely to be here. And yeah, I remember the telethon. Growing up in Los Angeles, the Chabad telethon would be on once a year. And we were not a Chabad family at all, but you would turn it on and it would always, John Voight would always be on it and leading it. And at some point he would start crying and get very emotional. He's, kind of a character. Anyway, it's really, really nice to be here right now and to see everybody, or to imagine that you're there, I guess, because of how this works. I want to talk a little bit about this really, really cool passage from Ruth Rabbah. And I'm new to not having everybody else on gallery view with this. I'm very used to that. So I know I see Alana. So, just give me a shout out for, I'm going to ask questions and stuff like that because I want to get people's input on things. But I don't have to do that. No, not of you, but what do you think of this? So just jump in. But I'm going to go ahead and should I share screen? Is that where? No, you're going to share screen. Great. And here we go. So there's this great passage, and it says Tikkun Leil Shavuot 5774. I couldn't get rid of that on the PDF, and I don't have the same word processing program anymore, so I just it's good enough. There's this great moment in the Midrash on Ruth Rabbah, which talks about how we reflect on our own actions and how we operate that way. And so I'm just going to give a sort of really brief context, and then I'm going to go ahead and we're going to read this text. So the context, it's Ruth 2:14, the Tochal v'tisba v'tetar, which talks about Boaz meeting Ruth. And this is the moment when he kind of realizes that he is going to, there's a lot going on here, obviously, but this is the moment when Boaz realizes that he's going to have this long-term relationship with Ruth, that he's possibly her Goel, her Redeemer, and that this is going to be something that's meaningful. And we don't have to go into it too much. And it says, he handed her roasted grain and she ate her fill and had some left over. So then Ruth Rabbah, which is the Midrash on this, which is a little bit later, it's probably from about the 700s, but based on lots of older oral traditions, cites something from Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Marion. So is it work? Should I ask somebody to read this or should I just read this? I'll just read it. Okay, good. So I'm going to read in English here, or I'll sort of jump back and forth. I'll do some Hebrew at the beginning. It says, Amar Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Marion, Ba hagatuv l'lamedcha, she'im adam oseh mitzvah, ya'asena b'levav shalem. She'ilu haya Reuven yodea she'akadosh baruch hu machtiv alav, vayishma Reuven v'atzilehu mi'adam, biktefo haya molicho etzel aviv. So I'll just go back into English. Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Marion says, the text comes to teach you that when a person does a mitzvah, that person should do it with a full heart. And then it goes through. It says, for if Reuben had known that the Kadosh Baruch Hu was writing about him, and it says, quote, but when Reuben heard, he tried to save him from them, he would have borne Yosef on his shoulders to his fathers. Now, this is an interesting image, right? This is talking about Reuben and Yosef and throwing him in the pit. And it's saying, if Reuben had known that this was going to be written about in the Torah, right, in this big, in the bedside table of every hotel room, all these places, maybe he wouldn't just have kind of half-heartedly tried to save Joseph, but says he would have borne Joseph on his shoulder to his fathers. And it continues, if Aaron had known that the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that God was writing about him, even now he is setting out to meet you, with lutes and pipes he would have gone out to greet Moses. And we're going to look at these specific texts in a minute. But it's saying that if Aaron had known that Moses was, had understood that this meeting between him and Moses was this big moment, he wouldn't have just set out to meet him, but he would have really jumped at the chance and been celebrating this. And if Boaz had known the Kadosh Baruch Hu was writing about him, he handed her roasted grain, she ate her fill and had some left over, he would have fed her stuffed veal instead, which I'm sure was very commonplace there. So I find this to be like a powerful text, at least at first glance. Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Marion is saying that when you do something, you should do it with a full heart. And it continues with this comment that if so-and-so had known that God was machtiv alav, which is an interesting phrase, that God was writing about them, they would have done something differently. Now, one thing I'm not completely sure about in this text that I struggle with, though this struggle is kind of going to appear more, is whether the first sentence and the second sentence actually follow with each other. So when you do a mitzvah with a full heart, does it necessarily follow that that means that you think of God writing about you? Is that like what's at stake here? You know, that's a complicated thing. I'm not sure, and I want to sort of put that up for conversation. But I also want to focus on this line of Ilu haya yodea shehakadosh baruch hu machtiv alav. That if you knew that God was writing about you, you would do more. Now, like, that can sometimes be an appealing way to think about ethics, maybe. You know, what would it be like if God really cared about this? How could I not do this, or whatever it is? But it can be a little bit anxiety-provoking, too, to feel like, you know, God is... Oh, that's... Did I just get kicked out?
You're here.
Yeah, my phone. Am I still here? I got a junk call and it kicked me out. Can you see me? Because I can't.
Yes, yes. Do you hear me? You're good.
There we go. And minimize the window. Okay, good. That was just frustrating time for it. So there's this idea kind of that God is watching you, right? And that can be sometimes nice, but you know, I can't imagine telling that to my kids to say, you know, God is watching you. Like that feels really kind of bad. Okay, let's look at these specific texts here. So the first one is Reuven. It says, they said to one another, Vayumru ishel achiv, hine bal hachalamot halazeh ba. They said to one another, here comes that dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we can say, a savage beast devoured him. We shall see what comes of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he tried to save him from them. He said, let us not take his life. And Reuben went on, shed no blood, cast him into that pit out in the wilderness, but do not touch him yourselves, intending to save him from them and restore him to his father. So this is this piece that we get about Reuben trying to save Joseph, and it's a little bit, you know, incomplete, right? And I think this is why the text is cited here, that Reuben tries to save him, but he doesn't actually rescue him. He just says, let's not kill him. He says, throw him into this pit. Now, I want to pause for a second. One thing that comes up when you think about Reuben, and that I find interesting and bizarre about this text, is this isn't the only thing that Reuben has done in his life that's maybe less good. In fact, there's a passage later on, and it's only alluded to briefly, where Reuben actually sleeps with one of his father's concubines, with Bilhah and Zilpah. And that is this really, really problematic moment. Yeah, you can go ahead and scroll down to the next text. And it's funny because you would say if at any moment in his life, Reuben should have thought of God as watching him, maybe it wasn't with the Joseph thing, but maybe it was when he was like about to commit this either sort of patriarchal slant or incest, like something that was really wrong. Okay, let's go with Aaron now. So Exodus 4:14, But Moses said to the Lord, to God, please, O Lord, I have never been a man of words, either in times past or now that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. And the Lord said to him, who gives man speech? Who makes him dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? It is not I, the Lord. I can always hear this in like the Prince of Egypt part. Anyway, now go, and I will be with you as you speak and will instruct you on what to say. But he said, please, O Lord, make someone else your agent. The Lord became angry with Moses, and he said, there is your brother Aaron the Levite. He, I know, speaks readily. Even now he is setting out to meet you, and he will be happy to see you. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. I will be with you and with him as you speak, and tell both of you what to do. And he shall speak for you to the people. Thus he shall serve as your spokesman, with you playing the role of God to him. So here's this moment where Aaron, it says, is coming out to meet Moses. And the original Midrash says, if Aaron had known that God was writing about him, God would say something like, look, Aaron's coming out to meet you and bringing a whole parade because he knows how special this is. Now, here's the other thing. Just like with Yosef and Reuben, maybe the Yosef story wasn't the only bad thing that Reuben did in his life. Here too, if Aaron had to think about God writing about him to maybe improve his behavior, maybe it wasn't this little thing in Exodus 4:14, but it would be like the entire golden calf incident, right? If there's any moment for Aaron to do better, right? Why would the Midrash pick this instead of saying, oh, here's a moment when we can think about what if we really took this seriously, right? It's a little bit bizarre that in two cases, right, the Midrash cites two biblical characters, two Torah characters, both of whom have committed far worse sins in their life, but doesn't address those. And something's kind of strange here. Why don't you go ahead and scroll to the next page? Thank you so much. Okay, so this is the Ruth context. She prostrated herself with her face to the ground and said to him, why are you so kind as to single me out when I am a foreigner? Boaz said in reply, I have been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known before. May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge. She answered, you are most kind, my Lord, to comfort me and to speak gently to your maidservant, though I am not so much as one of your maidservants. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here and partake of the meal and dip your morsel in the vinegar. So she sat down beside the reapers. He handed her roasted grain and she ate her fill and had some left over. So I actually just find this one to be a strange application of this principle in any case, because this seems different from Reuben and Aaron, where Boaz seems to be doing something really kind. And I don't think it's the kindness that Boaz is showing here is about the type of food, but it's about the sort of rescuing of this vulnerable person. But maybe this fits a little bit better with the Midrash point that he could have done something more of a celebration. I find this text to be sort of out of sync with the other two, where Aaron and Reuben are sort of these problematic characters in different ways at these moments. And this is a little bit more straightforward. And I think there are things that are certainly very problematic about the sort of Boaz-Ruth patriarchal structure. Like there's a lot going on there, but I'm not sure that Midrash is thinking about those. But something that this points me to, and in a minute we're going to look at a text from the Baal Shem Tov that I think addresses this, is that sometimes let me just say this differently. There's a possibility when you read a Midrash like this, saying that you should imagine that God is writing about you, and so you should always do everything with a full heart. That can be kind of crazy making. That can really make you kind of watched and maybe self-judgmental, and it's not really a healthy way to live. And I think the Midrash, honestly, picking pretty bad examples for this kind of demonstrates that point, that maybe this isn't a good way to live. And you could make this Midrash say something smaller, right? You could say, no, it's just saying when you do a Midrash, a mitzvah, you should do it wholeheartedly. And we're not actually talking about this idea of God writing about you. But I'm not so sure, right? The language of, if you imagine that God was writing about you, you would have done something differently, feels like a very heavy-handed thing, right? It feels like the sort of ultimate in a sort of surveillance Judaism, that feels really problematic. and I don't think is a particularly a pleasant way to live. But if we look at the next text, if you scroll down just to the next thing from the Baal Shem Tov, I think he provides a curative for this. So this is a translation because I want to just go through this a little bit quickly. This is from Amuta Tefillah, which you can cite in here, and I'm going to sort of go through and talk. And I brought the Bavli text below, but we're not going to get into that. So he says, I heard an explanation, or the writer of this, right, talking about the Baal Shem Tov, I heard an explanation in the name of my teacher, the Besh, the Baal Shem Tov, of the following Talmudic dictum. And so this is Brachot 33b to 34a, which I'm just going to read quoted here. Rabbi Zeira said, anyone who says Shema, Shema is to be silenced. So this is a thing that we might know about, right? You're not supposed to say Shema, Shema because there are these two, maybe it suggests that there are two gods that you're talking to. Said Rav Papa to Abaye, perhaps the person repeated himself because he or she did not have the requisite kavanah the first time, which is like a great point, right? Maybe you didn't say Shema, Shema because you're praying to like two different gods, but maybe you just weren't paying attention, which, you know, happens like more often than we don't like to say, I'm sure. Whereupon Abaye answered, is one to treat one's relationship to heaven as a casual friendship, right? That's like really harsh and kind of beautiful, right? It's, you know, he's basically saying too bad, right? Like you're talking to God at this moment, pay attention. And he continues, a person who did not have a tuned intention to begin with deserves to be prodded with the blacksmith's poker until the awareness is properly attuned. Okay, like that's his way of saying too bad. And, you know, I do like that image a lot, even though it's, you know, kind of upsetting. Now the Baal Shem Tov says something about this, which I think is really powerful. Now somebody once asked my teacher, somebody once asked the Baal Shem Tov, if one realized that she or he had recited many words of the Shema without the proper focus, is it permissible to repeat them with kavanah? So if you're getting in the middle of the Shema and you've realized you just haven't been paying attention, right? You've just been on autopilot. What is it permissible to repeat them with kavanah? And the Baal Shem Tov replied as follows. It is well known that nothing exists wherein the presence of the name does not inhere, and even outside thoughts contain holy sparks, as is known. So if the person had recited many of the words of the Shema without kavanah and with outside thoughts, this very realization comes so as to enable one to remove the holy sparks from their unseemly mental surrounding. That is what the Baal Shem Tov is saying. If you've been distracted during the Shema, right, you're saying something else, you're not there, those other thoughts that are coming to you, those distractions, that's actually part of it, right? That's actually part of what's going on, right? The cliche is it's all part of the process, but really this is saying, no, you were supposed to be there. You were supposed to not have kavanah, and this is something that's coming to awareness because this is actually a realization. And continuing, thus, if the person were to repeat the words, she or he would indicate thereby that God was not present within the original distracted recitation, right? If you repeated the words, it's like saying, I guess God didn't have anything to do with that. Therefore, he continues, one should not verbally repeat the words. Rather, in one's mind, the person should invoke the kavanah corresponding to the words missed. All this I heard in the name of my teacher. That is, right? And I find this to be so beautiful, right? Those times when you're distracted, that's actually a meaningful thing, right? Those times when you're feeling distant or frustrated or whatever else is going on, that's something meaningful. That is something powerful that you're having experienced. And we want to say God is in that too. And I think this is actually such a great reading of this Abaye story, right? Telling us, and of the Shema Shema thing, saying, you don't say Shema Shema because we don't say that God is only there when we're praying and everything is perfect. We're saying that God is there all the time. Now, I find this text to be a beautiful antidote to the text we read earlier from the Midrash, right? That text from the Midrash that we read earlier says, you always need to kind of, you know, the suggestion is, you always better be walking on eggshells because God might be writing the next thing about you. And this says, you know what? When you step on an egg, when you break an eggshell, that's part of it too. And I think it captures these characters so beautiful, right? Boaz and Reuben and Aaron are all characters who, I'm going to stretch the egg thing metaphor, but who didn't walk on eggshells. They broke a lot of eggs. They had a lot of mistakes. And that's okay. The purpose of our religious life and the purpose of this work is not to do this sort of perfection, performativity, but is to to be there with all of our messiness. And I think this actually elucidates that first statement of the Midrash, where it says that whenever you do a mitzvah, you should do it with a levav shalem. You should do it with a whole heart. And right, what is a lev shalem if it's not recognizing that sometimes in our lev, we have these broken moments, that we have these moments that we're not so perfect. And so to do something with an insight that God is writing about you is maybe too surveillance-y a way of thinking about it, but rather we want to say, what is a way that we can think about ourselves that we matter? And even at our dark moments or our frustrated moments, those are significant to us too, in ways that might be surprising. And so my blessing for all of us as we go through the rest of Shavuot, as we continue learning together and sitting together, is that we can really connect to our whole self, and that we can really feel a sense of empowered learning that helps us to grow into people who we would like to become. And I'd love to just get people's thoughts on this. You can stop the screen share if you want. And nobody has to share anything, but I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts on this or any better readings or anything like that.
Well, in this format, Eric, first of all, yasher koach.
Thank you.
It's only me, though.
Oh,
but I'm happy to.
It's not only you, so that's good. Okay, I was never quite sure. Tell.
I know, it's a very complicated concept. We've got hundreds of people watching with us in various formats, but it's just you and me in this room. But I love this because I was thinking about like the beautiful oops, right? And those moments where, like you said, like living in that kind of mess, I think is a really important lesson to learn in our lives. So I really liked that. I did want to ask you though, I was thinking about the sins that you were, the things Reuven and Aaron and why that was what was written. And so I was thinking about, why was it those big sins? And I was wondering about maybe there's something in the little things that we do and trying to have intention there. Yes, we're going to make huge mistakes. We all know that. And that might be, in theory, what's written about somewhere. But it's like those little tiny nuanced moments between, you could have given her stuffed veal, although I think that sounds gross. But you could have given her stuffed veal. You made this kind of little choice. What were you thinking? And like, when we have these moments that we could be just a little bit better, which sometimes are harder than, you could be really bad or really good.
Right. Yeah, I think that's beautiful, right? I think that's exactly right on. That there's a holiness to those small things that I think the text is pointing us towards. It reminds me of a story that one of my friends encountered in her CPE rotation. And I cannot remember who her advisor was, but her advisor told her about the importance of not justing yourself. So, there's this tendency when you're a chaplain, especially when you're a chaplain intern, you're sitting in the room with somebody and a nurse or a doctor walks in and you say, oh, I'm just the chaplain, right? And just is this phrase of minimizing yourself and you're trying to take up less space. And this advisor said to her, no, don't just yourself. You're the chaplain. You're doing something important. And, you think about, right, and the extended conversation in this was that there are all sorts of things you do when you're, say, visiting a sick person where you could just yourself. You could say, oh, I just sat with them, but we didn't talk. Well, that's actually a really big thing. Or I just, you can come up with sort of so many of these things. And I think this is a moment where we really recognize the power of these connections and of the things that we can do to help each other and to be there for each other. And, you look at this Boaz story too, which I just find such an interesting moment, right? And, I don't think the Torah, I think there's so much patriarchy encoded in the text that they weren't going to look at Ruth as an example of this. But Ruth is such a beautiful example of this, right? Ruth, you could say early on, says, I just am sticking with my mother-in-law, right? I'm just going out here. But it's such a big deal, right? Like, talk about a person who, Ilu haya yodea shakadosh baruch hu machtiv alecha. Like, if Ruth had known that God was writing about her, she actually would have done everything exactly as she had. She's such like a model of this sort of piety and love here. And I think something that maybe we're being brought up to is this sense of the way that these sort of minute interactions or these little moments that were deeply present, that were present for a person, can actually be, the sort of gate through which redemption occurs in our world. And, these texts are great.
They really are. I have to say two other things that came to me while you were teaching. One is the Shema Shema part. I was thinking about singing Shema with my children every night, right? And how so often, first of all, I mean, I have two boys, thank God, and so I'm often like saying Shema twice right away in each room. And secondly, I'm both preoccupied with, did we get the water bottles filled, and are the sheets on the bed, and is the kid actually going to stay in the bed? And also, what am I going to do after I put my children to bed? That, the thinking is all of these other things. So forget the what am I going to do, because that's my problem. But I like what you're saying, that even like being so consumed and really thinking about those other things that are not necessarily the words of the Shema, and yet they're really embodying and living the words of the Shema, right? I always give my children a kiss on the kepi when we, say Beinei Necha, between your eyes, and so is it focusing on those words or really just kind of living them? And I think there's really value, especially for distracted parents, as so many of us can be.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that's so right on.
Yeah. And then the other thing, and I think it's been a long, what are we up to, 23 hours of Torah, and so I'm a little bit foggy at this point, but way back when we started this, I know that Rabbi Debbie Cantor had us talking about writing, and I think that was writing our Torah or something to that effect, and that's also something to think about, right? Like, who is writing about you, or what is God writing about you, and also what kind of Torah are we able to create? And that really can inspire us, not in the like, God is watching us, big brother kind of sense, although sometimes that works very well with some people, but really to also be able to say, what is the Torah that you want to write? So thank you. That's a lot of, yeah.
No, that's a beautiful conclusion for this, right? What is the Torah that you want to write, right? Because God isn't going to write that book about you, right? Like, that's not how it works. So it's up to us to write this story. And how do we write our own stories of our own lives and bring holiness and love to everything that we do? So thank you all for being here. And it's just really wonderful.
Thank you, Eric, for being one of those rabbis who does bring love and all of that to everything you do. I'm going to fade into the distance as you become our host now and move on to the next one. Go for it.